See how much he loves you. Welcome back to our 5-week Lenten series. As you know, my name is Father Brian. Great blessing to be a part of St. Ignatius Parish. And what we want to do during Lent is have this 5 weeks where you gather together with others. As much as you can watch it yourself, it's called to be more than that. Invite several others to watch it with you or to have a discussion. We're going to have some people who are homebound and they can watch it on Zoom together, or they can at least discuss it on Zoom with our discussion questions. But we wanted to have these 5 weeks where you can grow in faith with others together and focused on these words: see how much he loves you, growing in your knowledge and love for Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. So we're number 2, and the talk today is specifically focused on the Mass brings us together. The Mass brings us together. You see, the Mass is a source of unity. Have you ever seen Princess Bride when they have that famous wedding scene, and he starts with those words, marriage. Marriage is what brings us together. And we could say that about the Mass. The Mass. The Mass is what brings us together. I remember my experience when I was at Mount St. Mary's Seminary. You can imagine the liturgies with 166 men, right? We had 6 or 8 altar servers wearing cassock and surplices. We had the incense swinging. You had the bells ringing. You had polyphony and Gregorian chant. It was like, these kind of like very particular liturgies and beautiful liturgies. And then I still remember a first year in the priesthood, I was doing some missionary work down in Jamaica with the missionaries of the poor, the MOPS, Father Richard Holung. And I went down there and we had an early morning prayer service at 5:45, morning prayer, the Liturgy of the Hours. And I remember when it started, I suddenly heard the sound. It was like, boop, ba-doo-doo-doo, boop. But it was bongos, and I'm like, bongos? Are you kidding me? For the opening song, they were doing bongos at 5:45 a.m. in this open-air church. And I remember thinking, like, this is Jamaica. Why wouldn't they do bongos in Jamaica? And really the diversity of music, how beautiful that is. Anyone who ever's been to a Black Catholic church where you have gospel music, there's something very beautiful about it. The diversity, but also unity, to say, yes, this is Catholic too. There's something very, very beautiful about that. You see, the Mass brings us together. The word Catholic means universal, all the different races and ethnicities. It's a foreshadowing of heaven, isn't it? The sense of, and how beautiful it is at our church. We have our Africans, those who are from India, have an Indian background, or those who have an Asian background, and just from Eastern Europe and all over the world. It's like we all gather together. There's something very beautiful about that. That is a foretaste of heaven. How beautiful that is. And I remember going to New York to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I remember someone said, when you go into New York and you have a Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, it's like, here comes everybody, as James Joyce says. He says, when you go to a Catholic Mass, it's very appropriate to say, like, here comes everybody. You have the wealthy of Wall Street and bankers, and you have those who are homeless or just very blue-collar workers at St. Patrick's. How beautiful it is, the mixture of the diversity of those who are gathering. There's also this oneness that happens, again, that we see at cathedrals in very beautiful and particular ways. All social statuses, but we all come together at the Mass. The Mass also has a very diverse group of people. All the different temperaments are present at the Mass, and think about the diversity of the saints. You have the sanguine clerics. You have Teresa of Avila, who was very winsome but would get a lot of stuff done. You have John of the Cross, who was very humble and very deep thinking and very wrote some beautiful spiritual writings. John of the Cross, is present also with the saints from heaven. You had St. Philip Neri, who's very sanguine of like, let's do pilgrimages, let's do music. You have the sanguine temperaments very much present. And you have the St. Jerome's, very deep thinkers and melancholic, maybe a little grumpy at times, but the type of intensity that he gave with translating the scriptures and sermons, and just brilliant mind and a great gift of the church, where everybody gathers at the Mass, all the different temperaments. And not just the temperaments, but you also have all those with various leanings. And at the Catholic Church, there's always some things we're going to be more conservative about and also more progressive about. When you take into moral teachings, the church has always been conservative. We're talking about timeless teachings of the faith. But when you talk about the human person, we're always going to be more progressive. working with refugees and immigrants. We're going to be front lines going into prisons and with those on death row. Yeah, we're always going to be stretched in the dignity of every human person from conception to natural death. I remember just thinking about two examples of a little bit opposite extremes that are both very Catholic and up for canonization. You have Venerable Cardinal Mindszenty. And here he was fighting, the communists were basically oppressing the church in Hungary. He was tortured for his faith mercilessly, and he was like kind of a stalwart against communism in Hungary. But you also have the Dorothy Day of Paris, Venerable Madeleine Delbrel. And yeah, was she a little bit more favorable to some of the things within the spirit of communism and let's work together? And she was definitely very left-leaning, but she's a venerable and part of the church and saying, how can we work with the poor and how can we work in community? So there's something very beautiful about that. And we all gather together at the Mass. But here comes everybody. Doesn't mean a diversity of belief. I think we need to remind ourselves at the time, there is a oneness with the Catholic faith. More recently, I remember hearing a priest and reading about it where he was like saying, I don't believe in the virgin birth and I don't believe in this. And people were saying like, what are you talking about? Are you saying you know better than doctors of the church and 2,000 years of saints and martyrs and we're not cafeteria Catholics. We're not buffet Catholics. There's a oneness with faith that's proclaimed, frankly, the scriptures and through homilies. We have a oneness of faith that we need to know that we always have. I remember another story of a cardinal who said, I don't believe in the devil. And he was talking to an exorcist, Father Gabriel Amareth. And Father Gabriel said, you don't believe in the devil? I'd like you to read a book. And he's like, well, what book is it? And he's like, the Bible. The Bible. Because the Bible, again, Jesus literally cast out demons. That's not a figurative expression. And he even has authority over evil spirits. So how beautiful it is that we have a oneness of belief in what we believe. I remember recently, in the last few months, there's been some commentary, like secular newspapers and media are saying things like, well, Pope Francis may change some moral teachings. And you're like, there was a cardinal from Cameroon that basically said this. He's like, wait a moment. Pope Francis is not the successor to Jesus Christ. He's a successor to Peter. He's not the successor to Jesus Christ. He's not someone who just makes things up. He's a protector of the deposit of faith. He teaches the timeless teachings of faith. He has an inability to change the moral teachings. I think it's just helpful to know in this unity that we have is not just shifting sands wherever the tide is moving. That's not our Catholic faith. And at the Mass, we're drawn into this unity of the fullness of Jesus Christ and the fullness of our Catholic faith. And that's one of the great, great gifts that we have as Catholics. Can I share with you something? I don't know if you know about this, but in a number of the evangelical churches, they have this desire for weekly communion again. I love some of the mega churches. There's these very prominent pastors that said, I really feel this draw to communion every Sunday. And you can tell they're attracted to this real presence. And while they may not have the ability to bring about the real presence in the Eucharist, that desire and heart for it, you can tell they have a desire for a unity that we have as Catholics. Is there anything more beautiful than that? Catholics, Lord, give us the grace to never take for granted the gift of the unity of the Mass. One holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. We're united at the Mass. It's where we're drawn together. And even when we have those times where, my brothers and sisters, I had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and we'd be at Mass, and yes, were we like arguing beforehand and kind of like fighting. There's something about like coming together at Mass. We were meant to be together, and something very beautiful than that. I want to share with you just a couple last things. The first is this. It's God's desire that we come to Mass and we are at peace with Him and also peace with one another. There's something very beautiful about that. Peace for one another. You notice we have to do the sign of peace before receiving communion. Now, being at peace with someone or offering forgiveness, as we know, it doesn't mean we have to become best friends for some people who have hurt us. Or it doesn't always mean we're going to be able to reconcile fully with someone who's struggling with addictions or mental illness. We're still called to love them, but we also need to set reasonable boundaries. But God does want peace with him and peace with one another. And I'm here to tell you, part of it happens at the Mass. It's God's heart's desire. Peace with God and peace with one another. This oneness, and through Holy Communion, even if we're separated across the world, we're united with them. We're united with others. A number of people who have loved ones who are, maybe serving in the military across the world, or not be able to come home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Memorial Day. Or they have friends who are just moved away. And yet, what happens at the Mass is both something that really does actually bring us together as Catholics around the world, but it also foreshadows another time. And that other time is heaven. The Mass is a foretaste of the unity of heaven. So may the Lord give us that grace to know that the Mass is something very, very special. And it moves us even more closer to that full source of unity in God and Christ. So whenever I meet someone as a pastor, it's not uncommon that even in the last 7 months, where someone comes and it's like, well, I just came back to church recently. Praise the Lord, you're back. You're back. The Lord wants us to come back as a family and to get together every Sunday with him. So may the Lord bless you. Look forward to these next few weeks, and may God bless our parish.